Good evening. Welcome, everybody. I'm Bet Egan, President of the League of Women Voters of Pike County, and I'd like to welcome you all to the first ever debate between candidates running in the 139th Pennsylvania Legislative District. At this time, could you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for tonight's debate, Dr. Amy Weidstrom, the Executive Director from the League of Women Voters in Pennsylvania. Amy?
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Hello to our audience here in the auditorium. Hello to our audience watching at home. Thank you all for being with us this evening and for participating in this very important event. As a reminder, audience, please do not applaud or cheer during question and answer periods. You can applaud when our candidates join us on stage in a moment, and you will have an opportunity to applaud for the candidates at the end of this event. Please also no flash photography during the question and answer period. You can take photos at the commercial break and at the end of the event, and no filming during this event. Please take a moment at this time to turn off your cell phones or silence your cell phones if you haven't already. Tonight's debate is being televised live by BRC 13 as well as streamed on their YouTube channel. No person or campaign may use or post any portion of this candidate forum other than media who are authorized to cover this event. I would like to start by introducing our two candidates for the 139th State House race. I'll start with Republican Jeffrey Olsommer, Representative Olsommer, and Democrat Robin Schooley Skibber. Thank you both so much for being here. I would also like to remind everyone of a few rules of the candidate forum. We will begin with opening statements. Each candidate will have 2 minutes. We did a coin toss prior to the debate to determine who would start opening statements, who would start taking the questions first, and who would start with the closing statements. I will then ask candidates a series of questions, and each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to answer the question, and then another 30 seconds of rebuttal time. We will take a brief commercial break at about 7:29, and then have a second round of questions collected from the audience. You should all have 3x5 cards or have been given 3x5 cards. You can fill those out and pass them to the end, and members of the league will come around and collect those from you. With that, I would like to invite Representative Olsommer to start with his 2-minute opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to be here tonight, and all of you for coming out to hear what we have to say. I'd like to say, first of all, what an honor it is to represent you as your state representative in Harrisburg in the State House of Representatives. I truly embrace my role as your state representative, as a legislator, serving the constituents of the 139th. I'd like to point out a couple of major differences between myself and my opponent. One, I have 35 years of private sector experience. I know what it's like to get up in the morning and have to go to work and earn a living for the ones you love. I own a small business, and I've run it for 25 years. I know what it's like to have to meet budgets. I know what it's like to have to pay the taxes. I know what it's like to hire and fire employees. I know the regulations that are facing our small businesses. I also have the experience of being an elected official. I have 10 years experience as an elected supervisor for Sterling Township. During my tenure at Sterling Township, I also worked with state representatives. I worked with state senators, local township officials in neighboring townships, worked on passing budgets, worked on grants within the township, both getting and applying for grants. Also had the ability, while working in the township, to work for and work with attracting a decent-sized business park, the Sterling Business and Technology Park. So I have that experience that I can use from the park, where I saw some of the positives and the negatives of that park, and I can apply that experience throughout the 139th. I, again, would like to thank everybody, and I'd like to thank I'm grateful to be here this evening for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Skibber.
Thank you, and thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity. Thank you, Representative Olsommer, for participating, and thank you, viewing, for this event. I'm Robin Skibber. I was born in Blooming Grove, and I worked in my parents' store, the Mountain Merchant. It was a local store, and there wasn't many of them around. We took care of our customers who are our neighbors. And my parents taught us that you need to look out for your neighbors. I remember my mother extending credit to one of our neighbors that was struggling. They taught us that taking care of each other is important. I took that legacy to my career in the Pike County Area Agency on Aging, where I served for 22 years. Taking care of seniors, keeping them in their home, supporting them with services and programs through our funding through the block grant. We worked tirelessly to expand options, housing options, worked on expanding transportation services, and I was able to open 4 senior centers in that time frame. Those senior centers became a hub in their community so that they can meet their neighbors, have a nourishing meal, and have a sense of belonging in a community. One of my favorite programs was the Farmers Market program, which combined farmers with some of our seniors' vouchers. I want to continue that work, and I want to expand on where we need services like medical, health care, women's reproductive care, mental health services. I believe this is a great community. We want to support our emergency services, and I think my career is working across the aisle, working with legislators and nonprofits and volunteers. I want to humbly ask for you to send me to Harrisburg, because I'll have your back.
Thank you. I'll now start with our first question, which is about the state legislature, and per the coin toss, Mrs. Skibber will answer first. What or which priorities will you bring to the Pennsylvania General Assembly? Please share with us the first pieces of legislation you would most like to write and pass in the next session.
Thank you. I believe it's first and foremost to address the gun violence. I believe in hunting. My family hunts, my husband, my son hunts, but I believe that we need to strengthen our common sense gun laws. I believe in what Governor Shapiro did when he reestablished the gun violence program to address this. That's how important it is. And I believe that our students should be able to go to school and their parents should be able to think they're going to come home safely.
Thank you.
Repeat that question, please.
Yes, of course. What or which priorities will you bring to the Pennsylvania General Assembly? Please share with us the first pieces of legislation you would most like to write and pass in the next session.
Sure. I mean, I have 35 years of small business experience, so I'm going to be bringing a lot of small business experience and small government experience with me to Harrisburg, and I already have done such. I have a bill being written right now that I plan on introducing this fall from the Insurance Committee. It's going to be called the Storm Chaser Bill, and I'm excited to be able to work on that and see how that progresses. One of the things that I can tell you working in Harrisburg and being a new legislator is that there are an awful lot of bills that come through. So one of the things that I pride myself on is trying to look at the bills that actually make sense, because there is a lot of bills that go through that cost the taxpayers a lot of money, create a lot of regulations on small businesses, and I look at it as my job to sit there and try to protect the people of the 139th.
Thank you. Mrs. Skibber, 30 seconds to rebut.
I believe that the government is here to work for us. So with regulations, I understand some of them might seem cumbersome, but in the insurance committee, I would have to hear what more that bill was going to represent, but I understand that each committee does their thorough job looking at all of these bills.
Thank you. Representative Olsommer?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Great. All right, my second question is about the effectiveness of the state legislature. So the Pennsylvania legislature has been criticized for failure to move bills on matters important to Pennsylvanians. The House and Senate rules have been cited as giving too much power to committee chairpersons and chamber leaders, causing legislation to die in committee, or if advanced by committee, fail to get to the floor for a vote, or if passed by one chamber to die in another. The House establishes its rules upon the commencement of each new session. The next new session will begin in January of 2025. My question for the candidates: what changes will you ask the House leadership to make to the rules for the 25-26 session? And we'll start this round of questioning with Representative Olsommer.
Thank you. So, you know, in my short time being there, what I noticed right away sitting in committee is that it's very partisan. And there could be some bills that come through that actually are good ideas. And when you sit there in committee, it gets very frustrating when you sit there and you say, hey, let's take some time and talk about it. Let's pull this apart and make this a better bill. And nobody wants to hear what you have to say, and they just pass it right through. So that's something that I would like to see change, because I think and I believe that there are plenty of opportunities for Republicans and Democrats to work together, and there's a lot of missed opportunities for the people of Pennsylvania when they don't.
Thank you, Mrs. Skibber.
I will concur with Representative Olsommer about some of the bills in committee. As a dietitian, we've been trying to pass the professional licensure scope of work for 3 years, and it continually goes up and dies. I believe the bipartisan way of solving it is important, and what I see as a committee is to be the clearinghouse of that information.
Thank you. 30 seconds to rebut.
No, thank you.
All right. The next question I have is regarding our elections in the Commonwealth. Pennsylvania is a state with a closed primary election system, which means that independent and unaffiliated voters cannot participate in the selection of the major party candidates who will appear on the ballot in the November general election. In order to do so, PA independents or unaffiliated voters must go through the process of changing their voter registration in order to vote in a major party primary for a candidate, but most do not bother. This disenfranchises 1.3 million voters who cannot vote in the primary elections and allows for local decisions to be made in the primary, sometimes resulting in, for example, school board or other local elections being decided in a primary, so that voters in November have no real say. Additionally, the legislature often schedules important votes on state constitutional amendments and special elections, such as this year's 139th special election, on those primary election days when most independents and unaffiliated voters are unaware that they may cast their ballot, giving voters registered in the major parties even more power to decide election outcomes. My question for the candidates: do you support legislative proposals to modify the Pennsylvania primary system to allow 1.3 million independent voters to vote in Pennsylvania primaries. Why or why not? And Mrs. Skibber, we'll start with you.
Talking to so many people in the last few months, I would support opening the primary. There's so many people who, for instance, during our special election, that weren't even aware that they could vote. And I know there was diligence put out by the election boards, League of Women Voters, but people are so used to not being able to vote in the primary, or the primary, that many of them didn't come out and vote. So I would definitely support opening up our elections.
Thank you. Representative Olsommer.
Sure. I'm a believer in, you choose the path that you take. And so in my opinion, in this particular matter, if you choose to be an independent, and rightfully so, I honestly believe that that's your affiliation. And if you have a candidate that you could put up in the primary, then you would be able to vote for your candidate in the primary. That's my opinion. I would make the argument to independent voters, and I try to, is that maybe you should consider switching to Democrat or Republican, and you can still vote the way you'd like to vote.
Thank you. Mrs. Skibber, 30 seconds rebuttal.
The only thing I would add to that is, from what the general public has been speaking of, is the divisiveness that's currently going on in politics today, and it's Republican divisiveness and some Democratic divisiveness, and that is what causes people to want to be in an alternative party.
Thank you. 30 seconds rebuttal.
Sure. As somebody that served in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and currently does, you caucus with your party, and so one of the things that that you get is by caucusing with your party, you have the opportunity to to be together, to have a broader spectrum and opinion on the matters.
Thank you. I'm now going to move on to some questions about local issues. The first is related to spongy moth control. Spongy moth, formerly known as gypsy moth, is a forest pest responsible for causing significant tree mortality and defoliation across the state, especially among oak trees. This year, spongy moths were detected in Pike County. Although the DCNR Bureau of Forestry treated over 290,000 acres by aerial application of insecticide this past spring, DCNR has encouraged all landowners to set up their own private spray programs at their own expense. My question for both candidates: with such valuable resources at risk, as well as the wildlife and environment dependent upon our forest, what will you do to bring more funding to Wayne and Pike County to help with these problems? And we'll start with Representative Olsommer.
Sure. I'm currently working very hard with DCNR and right with the governor's office to try to do just that. I've been in communication with the Pike County commissioners, and I've talked to many people at DCNR to try to secure funding for Pike County and the problem with the spongy moth.
Thank you. Mrs. Skibber.
I would also say, having lived through this for the last couple decades, that I concur with Representative Olsommer to start at the state and see what we can leverage with the state funding and then privately in our own communities, because it is devastating, and we've seen what it has done, especially down in the Milford corridor. It was very bad. So I think it has to be a combination of private and public money.
Thank you. 30 seconds rebuttal. Representative Olsommer.
No, I have nothing further to add.
Okay. Mrs. Skibber, anything further?
No, good.
All right. Okay, our next question is related to cultural issues. In recent years, certain divisive cultural issues have taken center stage in Pennsylvania and nationwide. These issues include books in school libraries, who should or should not be able to participate in sports, marriage, women's health care choices, and more. Do you feel, this is the question for the candidates, Do you feel that these types of issues should be decided by elected officials? And if state legislation is proposed that runs counter to federal law or the law of the land, how would you make your decision regarding support or opposition to such legislation? And for this question, we start with Mrs. Skibber.
I understand there's a couple of pieces there, but taking books out of school or dictating who can marry who or who can love each other should not be anything the government gets involved in. I think those are private situations, and people have the right to choose who they love and what they want to read. So I would say it is not part of any regulation that the government should be dictating.
Representative Olsommer.
Sure. So, I would also, I'm not in favor of any kind of book ban. I'm not in favor of any kind of ban for that matter. But book bans are, it's kind of like if you're watching a TV channel and you don't like it, you can always turn the channel. One of the things that is you see a lot that's out there is the transgenders in sports, and one of the areas I wouldn't support is men participating in women's sports. I have an issue with that, and I just think women have fought long and hard for their right to be where they're at, and I don't see that as good for Pennsylvania. Also, I do believe that government should not be in people's lives. I think you're free to do and choose who you want to. Thank you.
I'll give Mrs. Skibber 30 seconds rebuttal and provide the opportunity to respond to the second part of the question. It was a long question. If the state legislature were to run counter to federal law, how would you navigate that decision?
I would like to go back to the transgender comment from the representative, and the amount of rules and policies that have been written across the country about transgenders in sports are more than there are actually any sports, transgender sports people in high schools and schools. So I think that is not really an issue. As far as, could you repeat the second part of the question?
If state legislation is proposed that runs counter to federal law or the law of the land, how would you make your decision regarding support or opposition to such legislation?
I think that would be something that it'd have to be decided bipartisan to what the people want, and if that's what the states rules, but if it's a federal rule, to advocate to do it what the people want.
30-second rebuttal, yes.
Yeah, so my job as a legislator is to follow the will of the people of the 139th, and I believe the will of the people of the 139th agree with a lot of my positions in this, and so I would I would stick and follow with the will of the people of the 139th.
Thank you. Right, we will have one more question before the break, and this question is about affordable housing. Governor Shapiro has signed an executive order to create a housing action plan working group, a housing action plan working group to study the housing shortage in Pennsylvania. The governor noted that home ownership in the state has decreased since 2010, and the supply of new housing is not keeping up with demand. He believes 100,000 additional housing units are needed to meet the current need. Shapiro has also said that almost 60% of housing in Pennsylvania was built before 1970. Quote, "We cannot expect people to be healthy, productive, and capable of giving back to others if they don't have a stable housing situation," Shapiro said. "If they don't have a safe roof over their heads," end quote. Question for the candidates, and we'll start with you, Representative Olsommer. What do you think are the contributing factors in the shortage of affordable housing, and what measures would you support to address the rapidly increasing cost of housing in our area?
So the causes of, in my opinion, of affordable housing in the 139th are cost of materials, inflation, interest rates, lack of infrastructure, and not to mention sewage issues, local zoning issues. Those are all key factors in what's going into affecting us being able to do and have good rental and homes. So in Pennsylvania, the average cost of a home in Pennsylvania is now, compared to the national average, about $130,000 more than the national average. And a lot of what I just mentioned is really going into what's driving that cost. And those same indicators that I gave go right across. And when I speak with other representatives, they're saying the same thing. What would I do to fix that is, I believe government, first of all, can't go in and fix everything. But what I would do is support, right now, there's a package of 12 bills that House Republicans have in place. And I would support those bills. Some of those bills include things like pre-tax savings accounts for new home buyers, things like low-interest loans for builders of multi-unit housing, fast-tracking permits and for municipalities getting for home builders. Thank you.
Mrs. Skibber.
This is a subject near and dear to my heart. I'm glad to see that there's 12 bills coming through. My experience with the housing that's available currently in our district is we have a lot of people who are living in homes that they didn't think were going to be their primary home. They were vacation homes, and now they're living in them. So many of the seniors need assistance or venues where they can maintain their home or have an affordable thing to transition to. I was very proud to be a part of the Pocono Housing Symposium. The Pike County commissioners were there. We had developers there, and we had planning commission people. We had everyone to the table, human service workers, to figure out what can be done. And out of that became the Share Housing Program, which is one small program, but it does use the existing housing stock where somebody can come live with another person and have their own agreement and keep people in their homes, help them pay their taxes, and also perhaps exchange services. There's also PHFA and the Fair Fund and a number of other funding sources at the state have programs to help people and maintain their home, but also things like eco cottages. So I'm glad to see there is more funding going through that for the governor, and it is an important absolutely an important thing for social determinants of health for people to stay healthy.
Thank you. 30 seconds rebuttal.
Sure. Ultimately, it comes down, it's a local issue as well. As a township supervisor, I know there's ordinances and zoning in each of these townships that affect the ability to be able to do exactly what Robin just mentioned. So some of that, where the rubber meets the road, is at the local level. Some of the things I would support would be the ability to be able to tie in some type of low-interest loan with a developer, with development of multi-unit housing for seniors, getting seniors out of their existing homes, being able to sell their homes, and allowing others to come into those homes, so that we're moving people, seniors that are having difficulties upkeeping the home and maintaining homes, moving into a smaller facility.
Thank you, Representative. Mrs. Skibber, 30 seconds.
No, I have no more.
All right. Thank you. We have reached the time in the program where we will take a quick commercial break. If you have questions you'd like to submit, please pass those in, and we will have a second round of questioning after the commercial break. Thank you.
Destination America's going to new heights.
I'm buying a house in the Rockies.
The views are just spectacular.
Holy cow!
Where homes kiss the sky.
What is that?
I've never seen a tree inside of a house.
Come on, your mountain is waiting.
Feels like a real cabin.
This is exactly why we would move up here.
Buying the Rockies on Destination America.
Stream all of your favorite content on any device from anywhere in your home with Blue Ridge Stream.
I feel like we're living in a movie. Love you guys.
Formula One is go! Oh, it's contact! Formula One at its absolute finest! Oh my God, Max! This is Formula One!
The INSP network is your home for Western heroes.
You walk in real slow like.
Monday through Wednesday starting at 7, it's Gunsmoke.
I'm asking you to temper justice with mercy.
Then at 8, it's The Rifleman.
I never deliberately pulled the trigger against a man who didn't have a chance.
And at 9 and 10, it's back-to-back Gunsmoke.
Everything's gonna be all right.
Monday through Wednesday starting at 7 on INSP.
In a baseball season full of surprises.
I've never seen anything like this.
MLB Tuesday on TBS is breaking down the players and teams that are breaking out.
Big stars, big moments. It's time to play ball.
Stream all of your favorite content on any device from anywhere in your home with Blue Ridge Stream.
Thank you, and welcome back everyone here in the auditorium and watching from home. I want to take this opportunity to offer some brief acknowledgments and thank you to the following people. The staff and students of Wallenpaupack Area Middle School, especially Belinda Cromco, Kim Bell at Blue Ridge Cable Communications, WJFF Radio Catskill, Diana Dakey and the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County, the volunteers and members of the League of Women Voters of Pike County, and the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania for their support with the Defenders of Democracy grant. I would also like to thank everyone who has submitted questions. The first round of questioning we did were questions collected from folks who wrote in prior to this event. This second round of questions, we'll start with one from the last round, and then the second round of questions are from audience members here in the auditorium with us. So this second round of questions will begin with state issues, and this one is regarding gun regulation and safety. As gun violence is a significant concern for our schools, in homes, and public places, many communities are considering stricter gun safety laws to reduce the risk of harm. The question for the candidate, and we'll start this with Mrs. Skibber. Do you support the implementation of red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection order laws, which allow law enforcement or family members to petition the court to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed a danger to themselves or others?
I believe for gun violence, the increases in the state, in the nation, is not acceptable. I would support red flag laws. I believe universal background checks. We need to put all the safety measures in place to prevent any unwanted gun deaths or gun violence.
Thank you. Representative Olsommer.
Sure. So red flag laws, that's a broad statement, right? So my concern would be, first of all, what's in the details? The devil's in the details. What kind of due process is there with these laws? And another big concern I have is that they're fraught with abuse. They sound like a great idea. until you're upset with your neighbor and you call and report your neighbor, and then the next thing you know, their guns are being confiscated, and likewise. So I would be very hesitant to support a red flag law because of that.
30 seconds rebuttal.
As somebody who's worked with older adult protective service and gone out with crisis calls, I believe that there is a little chance for people to be frivolous about accusations, and law enforcement does do due diligence. I believe I would err on the side of safety rather than protecting somebody's gun ownership in lieu of having somebody get hurt.
Thank you. 30 seconds rebuttal.
Sure. I mean, Pennsylvania is a Second Amendment state. I support the Second Amendment.
Thank you. All right, our next question from the audience here in the auditorium. And this question, we will start with Representative Olsommer. What is your position on fracking?
Sure. So Pennsylvania sits on some of the, if not the first or second or third largest resource of natural resources under our feet right now. So my position on fracking is that as long as it's safe and the technology is used, I support it 100%. I've hunted in Colorado for 25 years. The ranch that I hunted on fracked. And before they started doing that, the rancher was living in a camper, and the conditions were pretty significant. They owned about 3,500 acres, so they were the very definition of land rich. And so when they struck gas, it made such a difference in them being able to sustain their farm and a change in life. What I noticed in the 25 years that I was in Colorado was that there was a lot of reasonable checks that were done by the Colorado Division of Environmental Protection, and they did check the cricks, they checked the soil around, and rightfully so, and never did they have an issue with it there, thankfully. So I would support fracking as long as it's done in a conservative and professional and safe manner.
Thank you. Mrs. Skibber.
I would say in our district, it's been a non-starter due to our concern over the pristine waters that we have. And thanks to the Delaware Highlands and the Delaware Conservancy, we don't have fracking, any further fracking, I should say. I understand with people who have property and property value can go up with fracking, but I also know of consumers who were scammed after they got their money because of being older adults with a large sum of money and being a victim. I would say I would be hesitant to support fracking unless there was an extreme amount of testing, but I believe in our area it won't even be, it's not even a starter.
30 seconds rebuttal.
So we all get electric bills, and if you've noticed your electric bill going up over the past couple of years, it's a direct result of the energy that's not being used to go to power our electric grid. So you know, as Pennsylvanians, I realize that Wayne and Pike County is a little bit different because of our pristine waters. But as Pennsylvanians, we do and should expect that we are getting the most that we can out of that to help offset some of our costs in energy, some of our costs, hopefully, in property taxes, some of our costs in our way of life, and we should expect that as we move forward.
Thank you. 30 seconds rebuttal.
I understand, Representative Olsommer, you didn't support the federal funding that was coming through for the Solar for Schools program and a number of other clean energy bills. So I believe those as well would help us increasing clean energy programs to help our electric bills.
Thank you. All right, we've gotten a number of questions about reproductive health care, women's reproductive health care. What are the candidates' positions on abortion and women's reproductive health care? And more specifically, how would you vote on a state ban on abortion? And we will start with Mrs. Skibber.
I am firmly pro-choice. I believe a woman's reproductive health and her access to abortion is between her healthcare provider, and her loved ones. I don't believe any legislation should be done against a woman and her own body. I don't believe there's any legislation that is out there for a man and his body. I believe in the Planned Parenthood, that we should have sex education. We should have all these services available to our young people and not have the horrific instances that are going on in other states where they're putting on full bans.
Thank you. Representative Olsommer.
Sure. So I don't support a ban like your campaign has put out, but I will say that abortion in the state of Pennsylvania is legal. It has been legal since 1992. It was passed by Democrat Governor Casey, again, back in 1992. And currently, as far as I know, there are no bills in front of the state house that I've seen that I've been able to look at. And so I really don't have, I really can't comment on how I would vote on a bill like that. What I can tell you is that 95% of Europe is at a 15-week wait. And in 2022, there were 35,000 abortions in the state of Pennsylvania. What I would like to see is some kind of programs by the state that offer support for these women that have to make these terrible decisions. And these are life-altering decisions I'm sure that they have to make. There's programs out there offered by Options Women's Center for counseling. There's programs out there by Providence Pregnancy Center that offers room and board for pregnant teen moms and abused pregnant mothers. There's also a program right now that's funded by the state, by the College of Misericordia, where a pregnant woman can go and she can take classes and she gets room and board paid for her and her children. And by doing so, she gets a quality education and keeps the family unit together.
Thank you, Representative. 30 seconds for rebuttal, Mrs. Skibber.
Well, I am glad to see that there are programs out there, but I think they're few and far between. And the fact that Planned Parenthood has been defunded for the last few years, and the number of their clinics has dwindled down to 17 statewide. I believe there's a dearth of help for young women in this state when you come to that.
So I'll add another. There's a lady by the name of Gretchen Eifert. She's a part business owner and very busy lady in the Honesdale area, and she's taken upon herself to work with the local FBLA to help counsel pregnant teens in the high school. She's also works with supplying pregnant mothers and families. She's serviced over the past year 116 unborn babies and babies, and she's serviced 83 moms and 2 single dads.
Thank you. All right, the next question from the audience is related to education and education funding. So the recent state budget included funding for more equitable school funding across the Commonwealth. This question is for both candidates. Although Representative Olsommer was in a position to take a position on the budget. But what is your position on the budget and the funding for schools, the increased funding for schools that was included in the state budget? And what is your position on the use of public funds to support non-public or private education. And we'll start with Representative Olsommer.
Okay, great. So yeah, it was easy for me. I voted no on education, and it was simple. When you're looking at the 75% of the 15 billion or close to that or more than that going to 3 different school districts, and those school districts are performing at a 7th grade level, look, I understand that a larger school district definitely has to get more money. I get that. But at what point do adults sit down and say we're doing our children a disservice? Now is the best time just about ever for a kid to grow up and have an opportunity for the American dream. These schools are letting our kids down. Why can't Harrisburg, why can't schools, why can't we sit down and talk this through and figure out what this problem is about? It's just a disservice that we're doing for our schools. To continue to just shovel money at something down the hole is utterly disgraceful. Also, to your point about I believe in school choice, I do believe we need to take a look at cyber schools. Cyber schools are, in my opinion, an issue in that we need to look at their funding and their regulation. A school can a regular high school can provide cyber training for their students, and at a much lower cost than through a regular cyber school. That additional cost is a burden onto our taxpayers. That burden shouldn't be borne by the taxpayers.
Thank you. Mrs. Skibber.
I support Governor Shapiro's budget. I believe it was thoughtful, and the fact that it's coming after a number of years of not funded and coming out of COVID, there are some reasons for the current scores. The teachers and the students that have come through the last 5 years have had nothing normal about their whole curriculum. The fact that Governor Shapiro's budget will include funds to help mental health services in the schools will help with the career technology centers and help with special education funding, which is near and dear to me and my husband's heart. I think the schools are held accountable, and I think the cyber schools that are taking funds away from our education are a concern.
Thank you. 30 seconds rebuttal.
Sure. So, with respects to education, what I'd like to circle back on is the fact that cyber education can cost and is costing local school districts in excess of in millions, and that cost is going right on to the taxpayers. That's costing you in your school taxes. The other thing that, whoops, looks like I'm up.
All right, thank you. 30 seconds rebuttal.
I agree. Cyber has cost the taxpayers money. In certain instances, cyber schools can work, but I think there has to be same qualitative measures and transparency in the providers. And I don't believe that we should be paying for them out of our school budgets.
All right, thank you very much. And we have one final question. This last question, again, comes from the audience. HB 2269, the Marriage Equality Act for same-sex couples, passed in the House and sits in the Senate. If it needs to be reintroduced next session, will you support it? Excuse me, we start with Mrs. Skibber.
I absolutely would support that bill. I think people have the right to love who they want to love, and I think marriage is a bond, and people should have the rights to visit each other in a hospital setting. They should have the access to their legal records and not be demarginalized because of who they're loving.
Thank you. Representative Olsommer.
So there was a Supreme Court ruling in 2015, and in that ruling it stated that a same-sex couple has the same rights as an opposite-sex marriage, terms and conditions, and that all states should adhere to that. There's a thing in the U.S. Constitution called the Supremacy Clause, and the Supremacy Clause basically says that if there's a Supreme Court rule that all state courts must abide. I believe that based on that ruling, that right already exists, and that's why I wouldn't support it. I'd also like to add, because I did have a little bit of time there, I'd also like to add one thing on the end regarding the schools again. There was a $1.1 billion increase done in education. Our schools in our area, the 4 schools in the 149th, saw almost zero, if any, of that money. And the reason is because they perform in the top 20 percentile.
Thank you. A rebuttal.
Are we rebutting the?
30-second rebuttal regarding the Marriage Equality Act.
Yes, so Representative Olsommer voted against the bill, but it's unclear why the Supremacy Clause would play into it if it's a House bill for the state.
30 seconds.
Sure. I mean, I'll go right back to education again, and I can tell you that, think about it. That was a $1.1 billion increase in education to our school districts, and that money went to underperforming schools. So $1.1 billion increase in this new formula going to underperforming schools. At what point are we going to hold our schools accountable for what's being put out there?
Thank you. At this time, thank you everybody in the audience for submitting questions. We had so many questions we couldn't get to them all, and I apologize for that. At this time, I'd like to allow the candidates to make closing statements based on the coin toss that happened prior to this event. Mrs. Skibber will start, and each candidate has 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I think from Representative Olsommer's remarks, he doesn't have a feeling that government is a good resource. I believe government is a good partner. I've worked in government. I've worked across the aisle. I've worked with bipartisan commissioners, legislators, worked with nonprofit. I believe that when something is needed in your community, you roll up your sleeves and work on the problem. I think working with the different legislators I have and working with a limited budget, leveraging the resources, and fighting for the funds that we spend, we taxpayers send to Harrisburg. I think we should be bringing our own fair share back home to our community. We could be working with other private sectors and problem solving with the issues at hand, but those resources should be used as investments in our community for the education, for our human services, which are the backbone of many of our programs, and for agriculture. I feel that it's time that we can make people get along and problem solve together. I humbly ask for you to send me to Harrisburg, because I'll have your back.
Thank you. Representative Olsommer.
Sure. So Robin, I'd like to thank you for coming out as well this evening, and again, like to thank the League of Women Voters and everybody that came out here this evening. Thank you for hearing what we both had to say. What I'd like to say is some things that I'd like to accomplish while I'm in the State House. I'd like to try to reduce taxes. I'd like to work to ensure that our first responders get the resources they need to keep us safe. I'd like to improve our education system to fully empower tomorrow's workforce. I'd like to, I'd like to fight for our Second Amendment rights and the sanctity of life. And most importantly, I'd like to work for the people of the 139th. One of the things that I've been able to do, and I think accomplish in my very short time here as a state legislator, is when I get a call on an issue that's a valid issue, I will work and move heaven and earth to try to get a result for you. And that is a fact. I don't ask you what party affiliation you are or who did you vote for. Your issue becomes my issue, and I personally would be honored to earn your vote on Tuesday, November 5th. I thank you.
Thank you, Representative Olsommer and Mrs. Skibber. Thanks to the candidates. Thank you to the audience for being here and participating in this. This is important that we turn out for these events. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, I'd like to remind everyone of some key dates to keep in mind. October 21st is the deadline to register to vote. Please make sure you're registered to vote by October 21st. October 29th is the deadline to request a mail-in ballot. That's October 29th. And don't forget that if you are voting in person, to vote on November 5th, or to make sure that your mail-in ballot is in by 8 p.m. on Election Day. The stamp on the mail-in ballot does not count. It needs to be in by 8 p.m. on Election Day. There is information in your program, thank you, for more information about key deadlines. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, candidates, for being here.
Thank you very much.
This telecast is presented by BRC 13, exclusively for viewing by its subscribers. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or exhibition without BRC 13's consent is strictly prohibited.
When I switched to Blue Ridge, first of all, it was affordable and I was getting faster speeds. Blue Ridge has extraordinarily high performance.